On the 1st of June, 1890, all of the paperwork was signed to begin the U.S. Census. And on the 2nd of June, thousands and thousands and thousands of census takers fanned out with the task of tabulating how many people there were in the United States. It was the first census in which a majority of states recorded populations of over 1 million people, and the first in which 3 cities, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, recorded populations of over 1 million. The census also saw Chicago rise in rank to the nation's second most populous city, a position it held for 100 years until Los Angeles took over the number 2 spot in 1990. A census bureau was not set up until 1910, so in 1890 it was still the job of the Department of the Interior. This year, 1890, they were very happy to do the census because they thought they were going to do it in quick, short order because of something new: tabulating punch card machines. They believed that the numbers could be tabulated quickly and put in the books, and they could move on to the next project, because in the past it had been a job that had been dreaded. The 1890 census attempted to collect the following information: the physical address of the house, the number of families in the house, the number of persons in the house, all of the names of everyone in the house, whether or not any of them had served in the American Civil War as a Union or Confederate soldier, their race as described by white, black, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, Chinese, Japanese, or Indian, the sex of everyone in the house, their ages, their marital status, whether they'd been married within the year, the mother of how many children and number now living, the place of birth of everyone in the house, whether or not they were foreign born, and if they were, the numbers of years in the U.S., whether they were naturalized or whether naturalization papers had been started, their profession, trade, or occupation, whether or not they had been unemployed any time in the previous year, their ability to read and write, their ability to speak English, whether suffering from acute or chronic disease, whether defective in mind, sight, hearing, or speech, or whether crippled, maimed, or deformed in manner of defect, whether they were a prisoner, a convict, a homeless child, or a pauper, whether the home was rented, owned by the head or member of the family, or if owned, whether free from mortgage, if they were a farmer, whether they owned the farm, or whether they were a tenant farmer. All of these questions were asked in the 1890 census. The 1890 census was the first to be compiled using methods invented by Herman Hollerith and was overseen by Superintendents Robert P. Porter and Carroll D. Wright. Data was entered through punch card machines, and they were also tabulated by machine. The previous census had taken 8 years to tabulate, and yet this census only took 6, and a rough tabulation, which found a population of 62,947,714, was announced only 6 weeks after processing the cards. The census showed a total population of 248,253 Native Americans living in the United States. That was down from 400,764 identified in the census of 1850. One of those identified was Curly Bear, this Blackfoot Indian chief from the Dakotas. Back in Washington, when everything was tabulated and given to the Superintendent Robert P. Porter, he made a notation on one of the pages along the margins, and it is a simple handwritten note that changed American history. He wrote, "Up to and including 1880, the country had a frontier of settlement, but at present the unsettled area has been so broken into isolated bodies of settlement that there can hardly be said to be a frontier line. In the discussion of its extent, its western movement, etc., it cannot, therefore, any longer be a piece of census reports." In other words, this census, unlike everyone before it, made no mention of the frontier areas of America. This small hand-scribbled note in the margins of the finally tabulated 1890 census is going to have a major effect on U.S. history, which I will talk about in a little while. A senator from New York was the first one to challenge the numbers that had been tabulated from the census. He said that the population should easily be over 75 million. New York City was also hoping to use the final results of this census to prove that they were the largest city in America. They wanted that distinction, and it is now believed by historians that they may have been willing to cheat a little bit on the final count to achieve that status. Minneapolis-St. Paul had always had a rivalry as to which city was larger, and it is now believed that they may have cheated a little bit on the numbers, and the numbers may have been skewed by as much as 13% as they both vied to be the larger of the two. Do you remember that pesky little notation wrote on the margins of the finally tabulated census? Well, this man saw it. Frederick Jackson Turner, born in Portage, Wisconsin on the 14th of November in 1861. He was a college professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. And he saw that pesky little notation and decided that he wanted to write a thesis about it. After seeing that small and obscure notation in the census, Frederick Jackson Turner decided to write a thesis about American conquest and about the fact that there was no more American frontier, that America had been completely settled, and it was time to think of ourselves as a settled country and no longer a frontier. And it was a work of literature that kind of remained obscure for a very long time until it was read by somebody who was up and coming, a free thinker, somebody that had his sights set on changing the world, and he decided to write the author a letter. This up-and-coming person was head of the Civil Service Commission, and he was Theodore Roosevelt. Mr. Roosevelt was kind enough to write the author to inform him that he intended on plagiarizing a great deal of it in his upcoming book. Because of that small notation on the 1890 census and the fact that Frederick Jackson Turner had decided to write a book, the government had high-level meetings, and it was decided that they were going to officially close the frontier, and the frontier America of American settlement was over. After the census was finally tabulated, it was put in storage in the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C., where it sat undisturbed until 1906, at which time there was a small fire. But the only documents that were damaged was the ones that tabulated the numbers for those who were crippled or blind or infirmed or of unsound mind. So it didn't really affect the overall numbers that much. You can go online and view the census data, including this page from 1880 census, which lists a very young woman who was newlywed by the name of Viola Plasters Kellison, my great-grandmother, who in the 1880 census lived in a small town in Iowa and was recently married. You cannot, however, go online and view any information from the 1890 census, and there's a very important reason for that. The 1890 census had always been suspect in its numbers, and it was largely believed that in 1921, when there was a fire and the records were nearly completely destroyed, that it had been set on purpose, just to get rid of them once and for all. They had been a thorn in everyone's side since their creation. One of the other lasting and continuing effects of the 1890 census is when President Herbert Hoover was elected, he believed so strongly that it had been a concerted effort to destroy the documents and be done with the controversy that one of the first bills that he enacted was the formation of the National Archives. The National Archives was created after the fire that destroyed the 1890 census, with the sole idea in mind of protecting all of the nation's documents against further mishap. And here we are looking at a page from the 1900 census, which lists my great-grandfather, John Kellison, and his wife, Viola, who was 37 years old and had 8 children listed here. One of them that you see, Toba, was my grandfather, Tobias Nathaniel Kellison, who at the time was 13 years old. I leave you now with one of Herman Hollerith's original punch card tabulating machines. Remember, everyone, be good to each other, do good deeds, think good thoughts, and I will see you again.